The envelope's edge. Wesley Mercer's fingers were stained with watercolor as he unlocked his mailbox in the lobby of the Portland apartment building he'd called home for the past 3 years. Bills, a gardening catalog, and something unusual. Cream-colored envelope with no return address. His name and address were written in an elegant script he didn't recognize. The ink a deep forest green. He tucked it between the pages of his sketchbook and continued upstairs to apartment 37 where afternoon light streamed through east-facing windows. His living space was a testament to his profession. Botanical illustrations hung on walls. Reference books filled shelves, and potted plants occupied every available surface. At 34, Wesley had built a modest reputation, illustrating for scientific journals and occasionally selling prints at the local farmer's market. Only after brewing chamomile tea did he remember the envelope. He slid his thumb beneath the flap, careful not to tear whatever might be inside. What emerged was both beautiful and perplexing: a perfectly pressed blue violet, its delicate petals preserved between 2 pieces of translucent paper, accompanied by a note card bearing only a few lines. The man who sketches peonies each Tuesday at Forest Gardens, who orders Earl Grey at Steep and Brew, who touches every spine in the natural history section of Powell's books. You notice the world's beauty, but do you know you're part of it? Wesley read it 3 times, heart quickening. Someone had been watching him. Observation wasn't threatening, but the intimacy was unsettling. He knew every location mentioned. They formed the weekly routine he rarely deviated from. Peculiar, he murmured to his friend Fitzgerald. Wesley had few close friends since moving to Portland. His work kept him solitary, and he preferred it that way most days. Who would send this, and why? He examined the violet again. Blue violets symbolized faithfulness in Victorian flower language, a subject he knew well from his illustration work. Was that significant? The next morning, Wesley found himself studying faces at Steep and Brew. The barista, Thomas, greeted him with familiar warmth but showed no sign of special knowledge. The elderly man reading poetry in the corner was a stranger. The young woman, typing furiously at her laptop, had never spoken to him. Days passed, with Wesley increasingly distracted. He sketched absent-mindedly at Forest Gardens, wondering if someone was observing him right now. Spent extra time at Powell's, lingering in the natural history section, half hoping to catch someone watching. A week later, another envelope arrived. This time, a pressed foxglove flower accompanied the note. You spent 30 minutes watching a hummingbird on Thursday. You sketched it 14 times. Your patience reveals more than your words ever could. Wesley had indeed spent Thursday morning tracking a rufous hummingbird, fascinated by its iridescent feathers. He'd been a loner, so he thought. The foxglove symbolized insincerity in flower language, but also carried meanings of healing and creativity. Wesley wondered if the sender was communicating through these botanical choices as much as through words. He began leaving his sketchbook open to drawings with questions written in the margins. Who are you? What do you want? But no response came through this channel. By the 3rd week, Wesley found himself anticipating the mail with unprecedented eagerness. His normally ordered life had been disrupted, but not unpleasantly. A color seemed more vibrant, details more noticeable. He found himself sketching people as well as plants, something he'd rarely done before. When the 3rd envelope arrived, Wesley didn't wait to go upstairs. He opened it in the lobby, finding a perfect pressed forget-me-not and a longer note. If you wish to know more, look for the gardener who tends the northeast corner of Forest Gardens on Sunday mornings. I've said too much through flowers. Perhaps it's time for words. Wesley checked his watch. Sunday morning was tomorrow, and for the first time in years, he had somewhere urgent to be. Petals and Patterns Sunday morning arrived with mist clinging to the ground at Forest Gardens. Wesley had never visited this early the public botanical garden. Usually saw him in afternoons when the light was perfect for sketching. He arrived at 7:30 a.m., sketchbook tucked under his arm, more from habit than intention. The northeast corner housed the medicinal plant collection, a section he'd illustrated many times. A solitary figure worked among the herbs, kneeling beside a patch of echinacea. She wore mud-splattered overalls and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured her face. Wesley approached slowly, uncertain if this was his mysterious correspondent or simply one of the garden's many volunteer workers. "Excuse me," he called softly. The gardener looked up, revealing a weathered face with deep laugh lines around the eyes. She must have been in her 60s, with silver hair escaping from beneath her hat. "You must be the illustrator," she said, her voice warm and gravelly. "I'm Francis. I've seen your work around the gardens. I'm Wesley." He hesitated. "I received some letters recently, with pressed flowers." Francis smiled knowingly. "You're looking for Josephine?" Josephine? The name meant nothing to him. "She's one of our botanists. PhD in plant communication systems. Fascinating woman." Francis gestured toward a greenhouse at the garden's edge. "She usually starts her research around 8. She asked if someone matching your description might come looking for her." Wesley thanked her and made his way to the greenhouse, his mind racing. A botanist? Someone who worked here, who might have seen him sketching regularly? It made sense, yet he couldn't recall anyone named Josephine. The greenhouse was humid and fragrant with blooming jasmine. Among the research tables stood a woman in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, examining a specimen under a microscope. Without looking up, she spoke. "You found me faster than I expected, Mr. Mercer." Wesley approached cautiously. "Are you Josephine?" "Dr. Josephine Winters?" She finally looked up, revealing intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "But I'm not the one sending you flowers." His disappointment must have shown on his face, because she laughed softly. "I'm just the messenger. The person who asked me to direct you onward values their privacy." She handed him an envelope identical to the others. "This contains your next clue." "Why all the mystery?" Wesley asked, frustration edging his voice. Josephine considered him thoughtfully. Some people express themselves better from a distance, especially when emotions are involved. She returned to her microscope. "I've fulfilled my promise. The rest is between you and your admirer." The new envelope contained a pressed rose petal pink, symbolizing admiration and gratitude, and instructions to visit Wildroot Botanical Supply on Hawthorne Boulevard at precisely 2 p.m. Wesley spent the intervening hours sketching in the garden, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Who would go to such elaborate lengths? And why him? He was hardly remarkable, just a quiet artist who preferred plants to people most days. Wildroot was a specialty. Shop selling rare seeds and botanical specimens. Wesley had visited occasionally for reference materials. At exactly 2 p.m., he pushed open the door. Setting off a small copper bell behind the counter stood Octavia. The shop's owner, a woman with kind eyes and dreadlocks streaked with premature gray despite being only in her 40s. She recognized him immediately. "Right on time," she said, retrieving a small package from beneath the counter. "This is for you." The package contained a leather-bound journal filled with pressed specimens of every flower he'd ever illustrated, professionally dozens of varieties. Meticulously preserved and labeled with dates and publications where his work had appeared. "Did this?" Wesley asked, genuinely moved by the effort it represented. "Someone has been following my career with remarkable attention." Octavia shook her head. "I'm sworn to secrecy, but I can tell you this collection took nearly a year to compile." Note tucked inside the journal read, "Your art gives voice to what blooms in silence. Tomorrow, visit the rare book room at the University Library and ask for the first edition of The Language of Flowers published in 1884. Wesley left the shop in a daze, clutching the journal. Someone had been watching him, studying his work. Collecting these specimens for a year long before the first letter arrived, the realization was both unsettling and thrilling. His life, which had seemed so ordinary, now felt like the center of an elaborate story he couldn't fully comprehend. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paged through the journal repeatedly, noting the care taken with each specimen, the attention to detail in the labeling. Whoever had created this new plant as intimately as he did, they spoke the same visual language. By morning, Wesley's initial trepidation had transformed into determination. He would follow this path to its end, wherever it led. The mystery had awakened something dormant in him, curiosity about people rather than just plants. A desire for connection he'd forgotten. He possessed. The language of flowers, the university library's rare bookroom, was hushed and climate-controlled. Staffed by a librarian named Richard, who examined Wesley's driver's license with exaggerated scrutiny before disappearing into the stacks. Wesley waited, tapping his fingers nervously against the polished oak table. Richard returned with white gloves and a slim, leather-bound volume. Someone called ahead to authorize this viewing, he explained, placing the book before Wesley. Quite valuable, one of only 50 surviving first editions. The Language of Flowers, Wesley read from the embossed cover. He'd referenced modern versions of this Victorian guide many times, but never seen an original. "You have 1 hour," Richard said, retreating to his desk. Wesley carefully opened the book, revealing hand-colored illustrations of remarkable quality. Between pages 42 and 43, he found an envelope, his fourth, but a detailed ink drawing of a wildflower bouquet, each bloom meticulously rendered in a style remarkably similar to his own. The note read, "Each flower here represents something I've observed in you. Decode their meanings in this book, and you'll understand what I see when I look at your life." The drawing contained 7 flowers: oak-leaved geranium, white chrysanthemum, purple columbine, field thistle, wild juniper, yellow iris, and thyme blossoms. Wesley turned to the index and began looking up each flower's symbolic meaning. Oak-leaved, geranium, true friendship; white chrysanthemum, truth; purple columbine, resolve to win; field thistle, independence; wild juniper, protection; yellow iris, passion time, courage. Wesley stared at the list, deeply moved. These were qualities he aspired to, but had never believed others saw in him. His mysterious correspondent wasn't just observing his routines, but seeing beneath his quiet exterior to virtues he kept hidden. The drawing style nagged at him. Something about the line work, the way the shading captured volume, it seemed oddly familiar, yet he couldn't place it. The artist was clearly trained, perhaps professionally. As Wesley prepared to leave, Richard approached with another envelope. "I was instructed to give you this after you examined the book." This envelope contained a city map with a location circled in red: the Portland Art Institute's gallery, and a time, 7 p.m. that evening. The note simply read, "Look for what's missing." Wesley spent the afternoon in a coffee shop, sketching the flower arrangement from memory and contemplating its meaning. Someone saw courage and passion in him, qualities he'd never claimed for himself. The thought was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. What if he couldn't live up to this perception? The Portland Art Institute was hosting a faculty showcase when Wesley arrived. He wandered through rooms of paintings, sculptures, and mixed media installations, searching for anything that might connect to his mystery. In the third gallery, he stopped short. A series of botanical illustrations lined the wall: plants of the Pacific Northwest, rendered in watercolor with scientific precision. The style was unmistakable, because it mirrored his own so closely. The artist's placard read, "Professor Penelope Rush, Department of Scientific Illustration." Wesley studied each painting carefully, looking for the connection. What was missing? Then he realized these were studies of plant species he had never illustrated himself. The collection complemented his own body of work perfectly, as if deliberately filling gaps he had left unexplored. They're quite remarkable, aren't they? Wesley turned to find a gallery attendant, Darius, according to his Namatog watching him with interest. "Do you know the artist?" Wesley asked. "Professor Rush? Of course. She's been with the Institute for 5 years. Darius glanced at his watch. "In fact, she's giving an artist talk in the lecture hall in 10 minutes, if you're interested." Wesley hurried to the lecture hall, finding a seat just as the lights dimmed. A woman walked onto the small stage, tall, with auburn hair cut in a practical bob, wearing a simple black dress. When she began speaking about the relationship between scientific accuracy and artistic interpretation, Wesley felt a jolt of recognition. He had met her before. Roots and Revelations Professor Penelope Rush spoke with quiet authority about botanical illustration as both science and art. Wesley listened, transfixed, as she displayed slides of her work alongside historical examples. Her passion for the subject mirrored his own. But it was more than professional kinship that held his attention. He remembered her now. They had met briefly at a publisher's office 3 years ago, when he was submitting portfolio samples. She had been leaving as he arrived, their interaction limited to a polite nod in passing. Later, they'd crossed paths at botanical conferences and garden exhibitions, exchanging pleasantries but nothing more. She had always been Professor Rush. To him, a respected colleague in a specialized field. Never someone he considered personally. After the lecture, attendees gathered around her with questions. Wesley waited patiently, turning over possibilities in his mind. Was she his mysterious correspondent? The artistic style matched, and her knowledge of botanical symbolism would be extensive. But why the elaborate game? When the crowd thinned, Wesley approached. Up close, he noticed details he'd overlooked before: freckles across her nose, a small scar near her right eyebrow, eyes more amber than brown. "Professor Rush," he began, "I'm Wesley Mercer. We've met briefly before." Recognition flickered in her expression. "The journal illustrator. Your cycad series in Botanical Quarterly was exceptional. Thank you." He hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Direct questions seemed to blunt after the poetic mystery of the letters. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the drawing from the rare book. "Does this look familiar?" Penelope studied the drawing, her expression carefully neutral. "The composition is interesting. Where did you get this?" "It was left for me to find," Wesley said, watching her closely. "Someone has been sending me messages. Pressed flowers, notes about my work." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "And you think I'm responsible?" "The style is remarkably similar to yours." She returned the drawing. "Many illustrators in our field share technical approaches, Mr. Mercer." Before Wesley could respond, a young woman approached, calling for Professor Rush's attention. Penelope excused herself, leaving Wesley with more questions than answers. As he prepared to leave the gallery, Darius intercepted him. "Professor Rush asked me to give you this." He handed Wesley an exhibition catalog with a business card tucked inside. On the back of the card was written, "Botanical Gardens, Japanese section, 9 a.m. tomorrow." Wesley barely slept that night. Reviewed each clue, each letter, trying to understand the purpose behind this elaborate communication. If Penelope Rush was his mysterious correspondent, why not simply approach him directly? They moved in the same professional circles, shared similar interests. The puzzle seemed unnecessarily complex. Morning found him at the Japanese garden section. A forest gardens, mist rising from the koi pond as the sun broke through clouds. Wesley sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, waiting. At precisely 9 a.m., his phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Look in the bamboo grove. There's something for you." The bamboo created a natural maze, stalks, rising 20 feet overhead, filtering sunlight into dappled patterns. In a small clearing stood a traditional Japanese maple, with something attached to its truncan envelope, secured with a silk ribbon. This letter was different typed rather than handwritten. Formal in tone. "Dear Mr. Mercer, I must apologize for the confusion. It appears someone has been using my artistic style and professional knowledge to conduct what can only be described as an elaborate prank or unwanted attention. Rest assured, I have not been sending you anonymous communications or directing you on this strange treasure hunt. As department chair, I've recently discovered that one of our graduate assistants, Emmett Quinn, has been creating botanical illustrations remarkably similar to both our styles. He has apparently developed an unhealthy fixation on your work and mine. It's perhaps seeing some connection between us that doesn't exist. Mr. Quinn has been placed on academic probation pending psychological evaluation. Campus security has been notified, and you should consider reporting this matter to the police as potential harassment. My sincere regrets for any distress this situation has caused. Professor Penelope Rush." Wesley read the letter twice, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Had he been following the breadcrumbs of someone's disturbed fantasy? The beauty of the pressed flowers, the thoughtfulness of the observations, now tainted by this revelation. As he turned to leave, he noticed something odd, freshly disturbed. Patch of soil beneath the maple tree, as if recently planted. Kneeling, Wesley gently brushed away the surface layer to reveal a small ceramic box buried just below. Inside was a single fresh violet, not perstand, a handwritten note in the familiar script of his earlier letters. Not everything is as it appears. Some truths can only take root in deception. Come to Wildroot tomorrow at closing, if you still wish to know. Wesley stood in the bamboo grove, conflicting messages in hand, utterly confused. Which was the deception? The typed letter disavowing knowledge, or this new, cryptic invitation? And who was Emmett Quinn? Blooming Truth Wildroot Botanical Supply stayed open until 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. Wesley arrived at 7:55, finding the shop empty except for Octavia, who was counting the day's receipts. She looked up as the bell announced his entrance. Right on time, she said, locking the register drawer. She's in the greenhouse out back. Professor Rush? Wesley asked. Octavia shook her head. I've said too much already. Go see for yourself. The shop's rear door opened onto a small commercial greenhouse filled with rare specimens and seedlings. Among the orchids stood a woman Wesley had never seen before, slender in her early 30s, with dark curly hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She wore soil-stained jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. She turned as he entered. Wesley Mercer. Finally, her voice was soft but clear. I'm Eleanor Quinn. Quinn. Wesley's mind raced. Are you related to Emmett Quinn? My brother doesn't exist, she said simply. I invented him for the letter from Professor Rush, which I also wrote. Wesley stared, struggling to process this new deception. Would you do that? I needed to see if you would come anyway. Eleanor moved toward a workbench covered with botanical specimens, to see if your curiosity was stronger than your caution. I don't understand any of this, Wesley gestured helplessly. The letters, the flowers, the elaborate clues. Who are you? I work here at Wildroot. I have a master's in botany from Portland State. She avoided his gaze, focusing on repotting a seedling. I've also been the anonymous reviewer of your scientific illustrations for Botanical Quarterly. For the past 3 years? Wesley's eyes widened. Your EQ? The reviewer whose detailed notes improved my work tremendously? She nodded. Editors keep reviewers anonymous to maintain objectivity.
Right.
But I've followed your career since your first publication. Your attention to detail, the way you capture both scientific accuracy and the essential character of each species. Extraordinary. But the letters, the pressed flowers. Why not just introduce yourself? Eleanor finally met his eyes. Because I know how rejection feels. 3 years ago, I submitted my portfolio to the same publisher you work with. They chose your illustrations over mine for the Pacific Northwest Field Guide, a decision I later came to agree with. Completely, your work was superior. She gestured to a portfolio on the workbench. I've been developing my own style since. Then, influenced by yours, but finding my own approach. The anonymous reviewer position allowed me to connect with your work professionally, but I wanted. She paused, struggling for words. More, Wesley finished for her. Yes. She opened the portfolio, revealing botanical illustrations that combined scientific precision with artistic interpretation. Similar to his style and technique, but with a distinct emotional quality he recognized from the flower drawings. In his letters, I was afraid if I approached you directly, you'd see me as either a failed competitor or just another admirer. The letters were a way to create a connection based on something deeper. Wesley examined her work with growing appreciation. These are remarkable, he said honestly. God, you've developed something unique here. But I still don't understand the connection to Professor Rush. Eleanor smiled ruefully. Penelope Rush was my graduate advisor. I borrowed elements of her style for the gallery exhibition drawings because I knew you'd recognize it. She's been a mentor to both of us in different ways, though you might not realize it. She recommended you for the field guide project instead of me, and she doesn't know about any of this. No, that deception I regret. Eleanor closed her portfolio. I never expected the letters to affect you so deeply. When I saw you investigating, becoming more engaged with the world around you, I realized I'd started something I couldn't easily end. Wesley considered her words. The letters had indeed transformed him, awakening curiosity, pushing him beyond his comfortable routines, making him see himself differently. "Why reveal yourself now?" he asked. "Because deception, even well-intentioned, can't be the foundation for anything meaningful." She held out a small pot containing a seedling. "This is Viola sororia, the common blue violet, like the first flower I sent you." In Victorian flower language, it means faithfulness, but botanically, it's known for its cleistogamous flowers. "Self-pollinating," Wesley said, recognizing the species. "Flowers that never fully open but still produce seeds." Yes, some things can grow in isolation, but they thrive in relationship. She offered him the plant. "I don't expect forgiveness for the deception, but I hoped perhaps we could start again. Honestly this time." Wesley accepted the violet, studying its simple leaves and the promise of flowers to come. The mystery was solved, yet something more intriguing had taken its place, the possibility of a connection between two people who spoke the same language of plants and art, of observation and beauty. "I have a recommendation," he said finally. "The Forest Gardens is looking for a botanical illustrator for their new guidebook series. With your permission, I'd like to suggest a collaboration. Your perspective and mine, working together." Eleanor's smile bloomed slowly, like a flower opening to unexpected light. "I'd like that." Perhaps, Wesley added, "we could discuss it over coffee at Steep and Brew, where apparently I always order Earl Grey. Tomorrow at 10, she suggested. "I'll bring my sketchbook," Wesley promised. As they walked together through the greenhouse, Wesley realized that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries weren't exotic species in far-off lands, but the unexpected connections that could grow in familiar soil, if only given the chance to take root.